Finally, after a long turn series of events for YouTube's issues, we are back on live for today. Apologies for the delay. Actually, we have been postponed to about 30 minutes, but it's fine. We are anyways going to have an hour of lecture. And speaking of doubts, Adrish, I have already discussed it. It's not based on console or on user. It's universal, right? Having \n is universal, and having template strings is also universal. I don't want to discuss more about that because that is not part of our lecture. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. If you are new to this stream, then I guess my name is Sandeep. Hi, I am a front-end developer as well as an instructor at AttainU. At AttainU, we strive hard towards making software developers in about just 7 months. And this is an initiative taken by us to make sure that you are using your lockdown in a useful manner. This is our 7th day on JavaScript, where we are concentrating about handling the syntaxes in JavaScript, as well as our final day is going to be building a small project with whatever we have learned. Yes, that is it. This is day 7, and today we are going to talk about functions, right? Functions is something which can be allowed to write some set of code in a non-redundant pattern. We'll discuss that more about later. And before that, let me just check on the live chat. Okay, Avinash, good afternoon. Biswajit, good afternoon. Gopal, good afternoon. Good. So I guess that is it for the introduction. Let me start my sharing. That is the screen share. So it is as usual. You will be getting your penboard as your thing. That is the area where I'll be showing some drawings to make sure that you are understanding in terms of pictorial representations. And my editor is going to be Visual Studio Code. That is going to be our editor for the next couple of days as well. So that is it. This is my code editor, and this is my output area. Right? So since today is day 7, it is also connected. I have already created a HTML file. The HTML file is allowed to have a visual representation on the browser so that you can output your JavaScript code. I have attached my JavaScript with the help of a script tag, and here I have just kept an alert message to make sure that it is connected perfectly or not. It is, that is why I'm getting the message called connected. Got it? Let me just realign the windows so that it will be perfect. Cool. Give me just 1 second. Fine. Everything is ready. So today the topic is all about functions and why choose them. But before that, we should also know what are all the different types of functions, right? So types of functions, right? And then we will see how to accept input on functions, right? And then how to give back output on functions. And finally, we shall see how to initialize to a variable. How to initialize function to a variable. Right? That is it for today's topic. So let's start discussing what is a function exactly. Let's say we are building an addition or a subtraction or any mathematic operation included calculator. Right? A calculator is something which performs all these mathematical operations, right? So let us say we are building that. Now, if you want to build some sort of addition, what would you do in a perspective of variables and everything? You would create a variable called a, all right? You'll create, let's say we have a number 1 and it is equalized to a number, and let's say we have number 2 and is equalized to 5, and then finally we have a sum which is none other than the addition of number 1 and number 2, and finally you will print it, correct? You will use either document.write or you'll use console log, that is up to you. But what if you want to change these numbers to a different pattern or a different number? You will again create var num3 is equal to 7 var num4 is equal to 8, or let's say 9 itself. And now var sum2 is equal to num3 plus num4. So 2 times it is fine. It is not an issue. But what if it increases more than 2 times? What if you want to calculate the sum for 1,000 pairs? What if you want to calculate the sum for 10 million pairs? In that case, you would want some sort of a factory, right? What is a factory? It takes in all the raw materials, it does some process, and then it gives back some output, correct? Let's say we are in a chocolate factory. It takes in all the raw materials like cocoa, sugar, all the secret ingredients what the factory makes. And finally, what does it give you back? The chocolate itself, correct? So we need to build some sort of a factory that takes in something and gives back something, irrespective of the value, correct? And that would make sure that redundancy is removed. Instead of creating variables and doing the same operation again and again and again in a repeated fashion, you can use a factory to get those values and give you the result, because the operation is same. You are adding the numbers, no matter the value, no matter the negativity or the positivity value of it. So that is what all about functions. Why do we need to use functions? The first biggest advantage of functions is that it removes redundancy, right? That is the major advantage. You can reuse your code how many times you want, be it 1,000,000 times, be it 10, be it even 100 million times, that doesn't matter. It removes redundancy. That is all about functions. Think of a function as a flow chart which is pre-made for your purposes. Instead of drawing shapes again and again for different sorts of values, a flow chart is made previously and that can be easily attached to the new flow chart. So let's say we are building a flow chart for adding 2 numbers, all right? Let me go back to the drawing board and let me make it full screen so that I'll get some extra real estate. So all my, just give me 1 second. Yeah. So my first step is to create a start. The next step is to have a stop shape. And I'll be having some sort of numbers, correct? We'll get some 2 numbers, num1 and num2 is equal to input, correct? Then we'll be adding it. Sum is equal to num1 plus num2, and finally we will print it, correct? Print sum, and the program is end. Am I correct? So yeah, this is the pattern used for adding the numbers. This is the flowchart used for adding the numbers. So what if the values change now? Would you draw another flowchart for those values alone? Or would you just reuse this? Obviously, we will reuse it, right? To avoid the wastage of time. So that is exactly where flowcharts, in other words, modified flowcharts come into play. And those modified flowcharts are called as functions. So instead of introducing like this, let me erase it and give you a new strategy here. Instead of getting these from the input, let me just decide it as number 1 and number 2, because that will be even more generalized, right? Instead of getting it as a value here, let me just take it as num1 and num2. So now this may contain any value. We don't want to specify this value at all. Now did this flowchart become generalized? Obviously. So whenever we have created a flowchart for some other purposes, and if that flowchart demands addition of 2 numbers, you can literally copy this flowchart and you can point it in anywhere. That exactly, my people, is called as functions. Reusing some code for your advantage is called as functions. Got it? And that is the introduction towards the topic functions. We have different types of functions in JavaScript. One, user-defined functions, that is, we create our own functions, apologies for that, our own functions, and then custom functions. That is, in other words, inbuilt functions. If you could guess, alert is an inbuilt function. What I'm trying to say is that the developers of JavaScript have already implemented the method called, or in other words, function called alert. All right. And we are just using that function. There are two jargons used in functions. One, declaring a function. And then the next step is invoking the function. Actually, these both words have different meanings. Declaring, in the sense, is as equal as creating. We create a new variable, right? Likewise, we create a function. Right? Let me just deal with the syntax later, but just understand these technical jargons first, because that is how I teach. Instead of straightly diving into the syntax, I'll just teach you all the nuances behind it, and then I'll slowly move ahead. So firstly, we'll declare the function, and then we call, or in other words, invoke the function. All right? We call that function because if we declare it, that doesn't mean that it's going to be automatically started. It's like creating a factory, but failing to switch on the main switch. We push the lever, right, to start making the missions. It's like creating the mission, creating the factory, building all those stones, missions, everything, but failing to turn on the switch. That is like without invoking and just declaring. Declaring is something where you create the function. Invoking is something where you use that function. So whenever we call the function alert, we are literally invoking the pre-existing function. The method alert has been already declared in the implementation, and we are just using it. Similarly, with the help of prompt, we use parseInt, correct? We use isNaN. Do you remember all these? These were all the methods which were used for our own purposes. These are all invocated functions of something which has been pre-written on the implementation. And these functions are called as pre-existing, or in other words, inbuilt functions, because we didn't create them. It's already been created in the program and we are just using it. That is it. The language implementers of JavaScript have already created the working model of all these functions. We do not want to dig inside of how it is working and everything. They have already implemented it, and our job was just to use that function. Using this function is none other than invoking it. So that is why I'm telling again and again, there are two ways to invoke it. One, you may just use it directly, or you should use some sort of parent class to it. But that is some sort of advanced topic. I do not want to go there. So you have to first create the function that they have done it automatically. Sorry, not automatically, previously, and you have to just invoke it. And that is exactly what we are doing right now. All right. Since we didn't declare it, these methods, not only these, there are many methods. These are all called as inbuilt functions. If you could see on the playground, by the way, I created the playground by just right-clicking it and selecting it as inspect and coming here to console. If you are there for the last 5 to 6 days, you might have been familiar with this area. Here, we have lots of inbuilt methods. We have parseInt, as I just said. We have parseFloat. We have something called a number dot toFixed, correct? We have the methods like that. We have toString, which converts anything to a string. So if I just press it here, if I convert it, you could see I'm having the object of undefined. I'm not sure why it is like that. Guess I have to convert it like this. No, I guess not. Okay, that is not an issue here because we don't want to debug it. I'm just saying there is a method called toString, and it takes in a method like that. We have something called math.round. That is also an inbuilt method, which, as you could have guessed, it rounds the number. If I have 3.2, it rounds lower to the number. You know what is rounding, right? If it is greater than 0.5, it seals to the value, or if it is less than 0.5, it floors to the value. So let's say we have 3.6. It gives you the value of 4, and if you have the value of 3.3, it gives you the value of 3. So that is all about round. So the conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that we never created these functions, right? We are just using them to our advantage. So these are all called as inbuilt functions. Secondly, there is another type of function which I said before, and that is called as user-defined functions. You can create your own function just like this. There is no magic around it. These are all functions behind. You can literally use this technique as well. So how do we create a function? That is a good question, and that is all about the next topic. Types of functions, which is 1, inbuilt or pre-written functions. All right, that is our first thing. The next topic is user-defined functions. Got it? So this is going to be our next topic, and we are going to see how to build a function. For that, let me take the advantage of the drawing board. As you could have already guessed, we use the keyword function. We open and close with parentheses, and we start using with the curly brace, just like how you did for if and for. Instead of using here function, we use the if keyword, right, for using conditions, and for iterations we use the for keyword, right. Just like that, we use the keyword called function here. This will make sure that you are creating a function. But only difference between if, for, and function is that you need to have a name here, just like how you have the variable names. So here you need to have the function name, and followed by parenthesis should be occurring. So one good example is that let us try to reiterate the adding functionality here. So let me just create a new function called function add. All right. Let me just take the parenthesis and let me open and close the curly braces. Here, what will I do? I will just create a new variable called a is equal to 1 bar, b is equal to 2. I'll put a semicolon here, and then I will just have another variable called sum is equal to a plus b. And finally, I'll print it, correct? So no matter how many times I call this function, this functionality still exists inside that, and you do not have to create this again and again. So what do I mean by creating it again and again? Before functions, we were strictly compelled to use this pattern again and again by typing it. We store those newer values into a variable, and then we were forced to have another variable for sum, and then we were used to having it printed, correct? But here, after using functions, we did not have that necessity. We did not have that redundancy. We removed that entirely, and we made sure that it is located inside this particular block. This particular, where is it? Sorry for that. Yeah, this particular block. And that is exactly, my people, it called as user-defined functions. Got it? So again, let me just recap this. You have the function keyword, you have the function name, you open and close the parenthesis. I'll tell you what this particular parenthesis does once I come into the parameters thing. All right, we open and close the curly brace, and we do whatever we want. So shall we like implement this onto our code editor? Let's just do that. So instead of all these things, let me just take it as function. I'll name it as add. I'll open and close the parenthesis. I'll open and close the curly braces. I'll create a new variable called number1, and I'll have this number1 initialized to some value, let's say 5, I have a number 2 initialized to some value, let's say 5. I have another variable called sum is equal to number 1 plus number 2, right? So that is all about the function. And yeah, let me just print it here. Let me just alert the sum is sum, right? So now we have declared this function. Again, you have to be very careful in this part. We have just declared this function, but we didn't call it. In other words, we didn't switch on the power, correct? In a factory, we have just built everything, but we didn't still switch on the power. Only if we switch on the power, the machines will start working, right? Likewise, we didn't switch on the power yet by not calling it. If I just save it and reload it once again, nothing happens. Is the sum printing here or with the help of pop-up? No, right? So in order to make sure this function is running, you have to call it, or in other words, invoke it. And how do you invoke it? Well, all you have to do is just call the function name and followed by the parenthesis symbol. That's it. This is how you call a function. If I reload it once again and if I press OK, you could see I'm getting the value of the sum is nothing. I think that's a bug. Let me just check why it happened. I guess I have to add it with the help of the concatenation string. I guess that is why the reason was. Let me just reload it. And if I press OK, you could see the sum is 9. So this, my people, is how you create and call a function. You create a function with the help of the keyword function followed by the function name. You open and close parentheses. You open and close curly braces. You do whatever you want. And to invoke a function, you do the same pattern of calling the name, typing the name of the function and followed by the parentheses. So this is exactly how you would create and call functions. Let me take this as a step to see the live chat. Right? All right. Virish Patel, can you provide any notes? Unfortunately, we do not have any notes for this live lecture. However, you can still see the recorded videos with the help of the playlist link which we have attached. So you won't be having any loss or something. If you had any doubts, please do ask me, people, and I'll be happy to help you. I'll wait for 10 to 15 seconds. Expect. Okay, I guess we do not have anything. Will you be teaching the backend and JS? Nope, this is only JavaScript, not Node.js. This is only carrying out for the client part. Unfortunately not, Saransh. We cannot cover everything on 10 days, right? This is just like a crash course. Yeah, server-side JavaScript, that cannot be taught in 10 days. You need about 1 to 2 months to learn Node.js. That is the truth. And we also teach Node.js in our fully fledged software course, the 7-month course. So yeah. About that, let me just start with the next topic, which is none other than accepting input on functions. So far, we didn't give any dynamic values to variables. Have we? We have just given a static value here, and we have given a static value here as well, and we have given a sum here. So now we have a problem, correct? In order to change the values of these variables, we now have to come here, come to the function, re-edit this function, 10 or whatever value we want, and then this will be another function, correct? The reused factor is good, but still we have a problem. We need some sort of manual work to come here and to re-edit every single time whenever we want to change the value. And do you seem it's a good idea? It's not at all a good idea, correct? So that is where you can assign inputs to your function, just like how raw materials are fed inside. Now you can decide how much amount of value needs to be processed into that machine. How cool is that? You need not have to worry about the dynamic value presence in any of the processing area. And that is done with the help of inputs. How exactly will we pass inputs? Well, that is why we have parentheses. In if conditions, we had the parenthesis for checking the condition. In for loops, we had the parenthesis for three things. One is initialization, condition, and then updation. In while loops, also we had it for condition. But in functions, we have the parenthesis for accepting inputs. Got it? We have parentheses to make sure that whatever the user feels, he can give his input, and that input will be considered for processing. So this is the maximum power for preventing redundancies. You need not have to create variables like this. You need not have to do any sorts of repetitions. For any automation, you go towards loops. For any avoidance of repetition, you use functions. How cool is that? All right, so let me just tell you how do we accept inputs. That is pretty simple. You create variables with the help of var, name, followed by the value, correct? Consider splitting it into two parts, the declaration and initialization. And what exactly do I mean? Like, let me just say it here. So we have this variable called var. We have the variable a, and it is equal to 10, right? This part is called as declaration, and this part is called as initialization. Correct? That is exactly what I tried to tell you. Whenever you're accepting inputs in a function, consider it as a variable which is split into two parts, the declaration part and then the initialization part. So what will you do in this particular declaration part is that you will simply write the variable names here. So let's say we have A and let's say we have B, because we need two numbers, right, to add. Now, whenever you're calling that function, let's say we call it as add, there you will pass the initialized value. Got it? So that is why I told you to split into two parts, declaration and initialization. You have the declared variable name onto the declaration part of the function, and you pass any value you want when you are invoking that function. Please do note that whatever value you are assigning, that will be assigned to the position where you have inserted the variable. So let's say we have three variables inside the function, that is in the parenthesis. If you are injecting three values, it will be assigned vertically towards whichever value you have assigned. It will be like this. So let's say we have A and B here, right? If you want to place 11 here, A's value will be 11. If you want to assign 13 here, B's value will be 13. You cannot swap it, right? Whatever value is assigned here will be associated to that variable only. You cannot ask, does B have the value of 11? No, it doesn't. Consider it as a pipe which has the access towards the data. Got it? So that is exactly how we can pass inputs into the function. All right, so that is exactly how we are going to do it now. This is version 1. I'm not going to disturb this. Let me comment it and let me do the same thing here. Let me create a function called add. And now I'm going to add in two part variables. And what are those variables? Number 1, right? And then number 2. Now, let me just create a value of num1. And that is going to be equal to number 1. Var num2 is equal to number 2. And finally, I'm going to have it as var sum is equal to num1 plus num2. And then I'm going to have the alert symbol as the sum is plus sum. All right. So now, people, how would we exactly pass in these values? Like I said on the diagram, we pass in the values like how we have mentioned on the declaration part. So number one's value will be 10 and number two's value will be 20. As you could see, Visual Studio Code helps us in just telling what it is. We are now entering the value for number two. That is why this is shown in bold and underlined. If I remove the comma here, the underline will be shown in this part. So this is all Visual Studio's intelligence. This is called as IntelliSense. You can type in the code and Visual Studio will allow you to just make sure that you are typing the correct order of parameters. That is why it's asking you to enter correctly with the help of underlined bold text. So the first value will be 10 and you separate it with a comma and immediately it shows you that the second variable is needed to be entered. So let's say we have it as 20, right? Okay, everything is good. If I come and reload it once again by pressing it, 1 second, connected, you could see my sum is 30. How good is that? We could make it even more dynamic by getting input from the users, and you all know how to do that, right? All we have to do is just take as var number one is equal to, instead of doing it, let me just take it here, var number one equal to prompt of enter number one, right? And then the number two will be enter number two. So what will happen here? Again, I do not want to go inside the edge cases by checking whether if it's a number or not. That is not for today's lecture. So let me just strictly think that the user will only enter numbers. Let me believe him. We will trust the user this time. So what I'm going to do is that instead of making it as a string, I'll first convert it into a number, because as I told you before, whatever input we are receiving from prompt is by default string. So I'll just try to convert it into convert it into number with the help of parse end. As I told you before, parse end followed by the received string. I'll change the same for the second string as well. All right. Now what I'll do is I'll simply put number one and number two, right? So here what will happen is that I am going to get the value for number one, I'm going to get the value for number two, and the values which are stored inside these variables will be passed inside the function. And those functions will take the value, whatever we have injected, and it will take the process accordingly. So let us test drive this as well. If I have it as number one, 20, and number two as 614, my answer is going to be 634. The next time, if I press the -3 and -5, it's going to give me the answer as -8, because -3 plus -5 is what? -8. So this is exactly how you will create dynamic associations. Now you need not create as many variables as you want, or you need not have the hassle to maintain all those variables. All you're doing is just creating it once and calling that factory again and again. You have created your own slave, and you can call that slave whenever you want to fulfill your demands, just like how I said on the very first lecture. And that is exactly what alert was, and that is exactly what add or anything was. Got it? So this is exactly how you would create your user-defined functions. That is not all. Still, we have lot more to learn. But let me take this as a chance to visit the live chat. Appreciate your answer. Yeah. Why can't we declare the variables outside the function? Yes, we can, but that is a different topic, which is called as scope and everything. I do not want to confuse that. You can do that, Kushal. I was just creating the variables here to make sure that it was belonging to this function alone. That is called a scope. I don't want to confuse that. After this course, Angular 2 is best or anything else. Actually, this is just a crash course, Viresh. You will not learn everything here. This is just a crash course. You should start learning by own or just, you know, come to the extra credentials of the JavaScript and everything. By this, user interface technologies is enough to get jobs in future, or any server side is required to learn. I think, yeah, if you want to be employed as a full stack developer, you will need to learn any sort of server side language. Please do videos on future of JavaScript and how to practice daily. Which topics are more important and which actually we tell all these in our course, to be very frank. We have a curated plan of what needs to be learned on which duration and how many practice things are required to just learn all these. Those are all listed on the course. We'll check out that. Okay, I guess that is it. Let me just concentrate on the next topic on parameters itself. By the way, I have forgot to tell that. These are called as parameters. I have told you as variables, right? That is said only to make you guys understand. But turns out there is a jargon for functions. This is called as parameter. You can have your own parameters. That is not at all an issue, but you need to call it as parameters. Got it? Number 1 and number 2 are parameters. All right? Okay. You can ask me a question. What if I forgot the value of any parameter? But before that, let me just print the values here of number 1 and number 2 to just show you what input I am getting. All right. So let me just give this a try run by selecting in the 10, 20, and it was showing the 20. You can see I'm getting the values as 10 and 20. Not a surprise or something. But what if I forgot to pass the value for this parameter? So let's say we forgot to pass the value for number 2. All right. Let us test that. I'll delete this. And now I am passing the parameter only for the first parameter. Got it? I'm passing the value for the first parameter and failing to pass for the second parameter. So what exactly will happen? Let us try that. Let me reload it, and I'll press 10 here, and I'll press 30 here. But could you see something strange happening here? We got the first value, but the second value is told as undefined. So what can you conclude from this? The variables, or in other words, the parameters, if they didn't receive a value, it means that the memory has been allocated. Come back to the fundamentals, what I have taught on the previous days. There is a difference between undefined and null, right? Undefined is something where you create the value for that. You create the memory space for that variable, but you do not know the value for it, correct? It's empty, it's sort of an empty. But whereas in null, it is like an empty basket. It's like meaningless, got it? So that is exactly what is happening here. If the value is not passed to the parameter, the memory has been set to the parameter, but turns out it did not get the value for that parameter. So the default value for any parameter is undefined unless and until you make sure that you have a default value. And that is also possible in JavaScript. Let me just teach it in a few seconds. So guys, understand this. If you fail to pass any value for a function, by default, any parameter will have the value of undefined. To avoid that case, you can use a new topic called default parameters. And that is pretty self-explanatory. If you fail to pass any parameter while calling that function, if you have this like a foolproof, or in other words, in cookers, we have this safety valve, right? To avoid any pressure leakage or any burst of cookers. You have a small rubber sort of sheath around the whistle that will allow you to not burst or something. So likewise, you have a safety mechanism for functions as well. If you fail to pass the value for any parameter, you can have a default value for that parameter. And by JavaScript, it is undefined, but you can change that. How would you change that? Well, it is as similar as creating a variable, but initializing on the same step. How would you create a variable and initialize it? You have the var, and you create the variable with the help of a name, and you equalize it, right? You initialize it, or in other words, you assign that variable's value to whatever thing you want. Let's say we have 1. So likewise, you can have your default parameters assigned to a value with the help of an equal to sign. All right. So we have an equal to sign, and then we can assign whatever value you want. Let's say we have 30. So now, if you try to run this again, let's see what happens. You have the number called 23 as number 1, and if you have the number of 12, but just note it, even if we are entering the number 2 here, we are not passing the value of number 2. That is exactly what I'm trying to say. Even if we are passing the value for both the numbers, we fail to pass the values to the function. And that is exactly what I'm trying to explain here. So let me just press OK, and the value is somewhat showing us 36. How is that possible? Let me just show you. If you could see here, we have the value 23 as number 1. And could you see something different here? Instead of undefined, we are now having the value 13. And that is exactly how default parameters work. You can assign a default value to a parameter, and if you did not pass any value here, the default value will be taken. But if you pass anything here, that will be the higher priority when compared to a default parameter. I'll show you that as well. Now let me just pass the number 2's value here. All right. I'll reload it. Let me have it as 45 for the number 1 and 684 for number 2. Now if I press OK, could you see this now? I'm having 84 as the value for number 2. So that is exactly how default parameters work. If you did not pass any value to the function, the default value will be taken, or your value will be taken. That is exactly how it works. Got it? Yeah. So why did we need number 1 and number 2? Why couldn't we use number 1 and number 2? Yes, that is a good question, but I just showed you to understand what was happening from this version to this version. We were having a static value here, right? We were having a fixed value, and we were always editing here to make sure that the function runs for all the values. To avoid that, I was just using this same version and using it here. But fair enough, your question is pretty much correct. You can literally use number 1 and number 2 here. That is also right. All right? Not at all an issue. But just to make sure that you guys are understanding from this to this, I was literally using the same pattern by creating a variable and passing that value of the parameter to the variable. That is why I was using. But yeah, you can just use this function. Okay, so that is all about default parameters. And yeah, one thing I forgot to say is that default parameters should always stay at the last. What I'm trying to say is that you cannot have it like this. You cannot have it like number 1 is equal to 12 here, and you cannot expect to happen. Can you say why? Because if you leave something with one parameter, it is obviously going to be taken with the first parameter, right? But if you are failing to attach the second parameter, it will not work. It will still say you as undefined. Why? Because number 2 is going to be attached to number 1. What will happen? It will override the default value, and number 2 will become undefined. So to avoid that, always keep your default parameters at the last, so that it will be associated to the last parameter. Okay. I hope you guys understood that, because there is no such thing as fixed piping here. JavaScript will automatically understand whatever order you are placing the parameters will be taken as the order which is demonstrated on the declaration part. All right. That is why I am stressing again to keep your default parameters as the last parameter. All right, that is the thing. Okay. Can we initialize the variable as var int num1 and get input from user other than using parse int in JavaScript? I guess in client side, you cannot get the value other than using prompt, but you can use the form tags or input tags to get values from it. But again, you need to convert it to string because input also gives you by default string pattern. So if you want to convert it to an integer, there is no other go but use parse it. Got it? Because that is how it's designed. Any text area or anywhere where the user is inputting a value, it is received as a string only. You cannot convert it to a number. All right. Yeah, that is all about how to accept input on functions. The next is how do we give back output on functions? This is a pretty finicky topic, but I'll try to explain as much as possible. So here, people, till now, we are using the alert message, correct? We were using the alert message to output the message. But turns out, what if you want to store the value which is given by the add function? What if you want to store the result of the add function? Now that is not possible. Let me show you why. Let me just create a value here called var sum. I'll equalize it to the invoking thing, right? Now, if I console log the sum value, and if I go back to the browser and reload it, the addition will be working fine. That will not be an issue. I will type 24, 86, the sum is 110. That is good. But if I press OK, you could see that I'm getting the value of undefined because just now I told the default value of a variable or a parameter is undefined. So what can you conclude from this? This function add is not spitting any value. It's not spitting any value to the outer world. It is spitting the value only in the inner world in the sense within the curly braces. To make sure that you are spitting any value to the outer world, there is a keyword called return. I will write it here. Return. Return is something where you can make sure that whatever result you want is spit out to the outside world. Got it? So how can we spit this sum value? Well, it is pretty easy. All you have to do is just type return and sum. That's it. So now what will happen is let me just reload it once again and let me type it as 24, 64, and if I press enter, you could see I'm getting the value of the sum itself. So point number one, if you want to compute any result and store it in the outer world, you should use return. Point number two, if you want to use that value to any other function's input value, you must use return. What do I mean by inputting to another value? Well, let's say that we are using this sum as another input to the function of add. Let me tell you in an even more clearer way. So I'll add the function again by passing the sum here, the whatever sum which I have received for the first two numbers with another number for 45. Okay. Now, let me just enter it by reloading. Enter number 1, 13, and enter number 2, 43. And could you see this now? I am getting the result as 13 and 43 for the first set, whatever I have typed it, and it gives me the value of 56. All right, that was the sum for the first set, correct? Now, after I have the sum called 56, I was again invoking with another number of 45. And that is why I was getting this printed on line number 30. So it's like calling the factory 2 times. So scenarios like these require the return keyword. Again, if you didn't understand this, not at all an issue. The reason for using return is because to spit the result to the outer world. You cannot contain the result only in the inner world. Sometimes you should require the need. You will have the need to get the result back to the outer world. That is after the curly braces. Got it? You can use this variable whatever you want. You can print it, you can add it with any other number, or you can use it to any other purposes. But if you want the function to spit out the result, you use the return keyword. Otherwise, it will not return anything. This is also required to understand, people. If you're not returning anything, you will be returning undefined. That is by default, right? So you should understand three things: empty variable, empty parameter, an empty return statement. These all three things will give you value of undefined. I will even write it here so that you will, oh my God, I'm sorry, I dropped it. No problem, let me just type it here. An empty variable, an empty parameter, an empty return statement will all give you the value of undefined. Got it? Again, I'll say it so that you will get this wrapped in your head. An empty variable, an empty parameter, and an empty return statement, and empty in the sense without using the return keyword at all, will give you the value of undefined. Got it? I will also prove you that if I comment this thing and if I just console log the sum here, console log the sum alone, I save it. If I run it here, it says me the number 1 as 12, number 4 as 24. Could you see this, guys? I'm getting the value of undefined here. Why is that? Because we didn't return anything. If you didn't return anything, by default, the function is gonna give you undefined. I'll also prove it here. As I just told you on the previous lectures, this playground is either used to type JavaScript or use any of the values which was used in the script file itself, in our case, app.js. So let me just use the add function here. And again, it gives you the indication of what parameter should be typed here. So let me just say 23 and 54 here. If I press enter, you could see the arrow mark which is present here. I told you on the previous lectures itself, whatever we are entering is shown by the lesser symbol, and whatever we are getting the output is shown by the greater symbol, right? The crocodile is on the left side here, whereas on the output, the crocodile mouth is on the right side. So this is depicted as output and this is depicted as input. But if I return the sum instead of just printing it, and if I delete this thing, let me reload it once again. Let me type as 43, 55, and now could you see something here? I am getting the value as 98. I am also using the same strategy here. If I press enter, watch what happens. It gives me the value of 77. Instead of undefined, it gave me the value of 77. You can see this scenario on multiple cases. If I was using alert here, and if I use the word called hi there, if I press enter, you could see I'm getting the value of undefined because alert method returns nothing. There are functions which is used only for some purposes and do not return. It's not like you need to return something. Only if you felt that the result must be brought to the outer world, you must use the return keyword. Similarly for console log as well. If I press console log here and press hello world, you could see I was getting the value of console log. That is fine. But undefined is given as the output. So what can you conclude from here? Console log, alert, and other methods do not return the value. All right. There are functions where you need not return any values. Right. So that is exactly what I was trying to tell. Cool. So the last topic is how to initialize functions to a variable. That is pretty easy. All you have to do is just initialize to a variable. But let me take this as a chance to see the live chat. I guess no one had any doubts. Let me just type it as well. All right, so I'll be waiting for about a few seconds and let me just take it ahead. Mhm. Let me also take this as a chance to take my pen actually. All right. Yes, I am back. Actually, the pen has fell far away from me. That's why. Okay, so the last topic is to initialize functions to a variable. That is also pretty easy. All you have to do is let me show it on the playground because that is even more easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new greeting function. All it takes is a name and it returns a string of hi there along with the name, right? Just a normal function. So how would you initialize to a variable? Uh, can we get input from HTML like prompt? Yes, you can, Rukesh, and that is going to be our next day's topic. DOM. It's all about getting input and everything. It is pretty tough, but yeah, you can do that. Yeah, what was I speaking? Sorry. Yeah. So to create any functions and assign it to a variable, all you have to do is just do the same strategy. You create with the help of var and you call it with the variable name. But in our case, it's going to be a function. And let me just have it as greet here. Let me equalize it to a function. But this time, you need not have any name here because we already kept the name here, right? So you need not have any name and you can straight away go by calling the parenthesis. And this parenthesis, I'm sorry, this parenthesis is going to take the name parameter and it's going to close here. All right. All I'm going to do is I'll return by saying hi there. I'll end with the string. I'll concatenate with the name. That's it. If I just enter it, it's saying syntax error unexpected string. Yeah, that's because I forgot to add the plus symbol here. So press enter here once again. It did not do anything. That is why it gave me undefined. Did creation of variables give you any return statement? No, right? That is why it gave you undefined. Understand this, people. This is not this undefined statement is not because of this particular function thing. It is because of the variable creation itself. Is variable creation returning you something? No, right? It's just storing you the value. That is why it gave you the value of undefined. Now, similarly to calling the functions as a regular thing, you can just use greet followed by your own name. Let me just keep my name here. And if I close the parenthesis and let me press enter here, you could see I'm getting the output of hi there, Sandeep. I could also use one of our students' names, Mugesh. If I press enter, you can see I'm getting the value of hi there, Mukesh. So it's just a small function, but it does the job. But the thing which you have to learn is this is the syntax of it. You create a variable, like usually with the help of var keyword, followed by the name of the variable, and you have the function here without the name of that function because you have already have the function here. You create the parenthesis, you use the parameters, and you do whatever you want. In our case, since we returned the string, since we need to get the output back, we were using the return keyword. But you can also do it like this. You can also have it like console log here. Console log. But one disadvantage is that you cannot use the value to the outer world. That is, after the curly braces. Now, if I call the same greet method of my name, you will still get the value, but you will not get any result back. It will give you the value of undefined. But before, it was giving you the value itself as a string. So that is the difference between console log and return. Console log is always used for printing it, but you will not assure that that result will be brought to the outer world. All right. Whereas return keyword allows you to get the result and spit it out to the outer world. Now, whatever you can do, you can just have the variable, but before that, I'll just use the old strategy here. I'll use the return thing. And now let me just have var greeting Sandeep as greet of my name, right? Let me also create a new variable for greeting Murugesh as greet Murugesh. All right. Now, what happens is that whatever value I was returning here was stored in this variable. If I didn't use the return keyword, this would have given me the value as undefined, right? That is why you need to give the return keyword in order to store any value to the outer function scope. All right. Greeting Sandeep will give me the value of hi there Sandeep, and greeting Murugesh will give you the value of hi there Murugesh. All right. That is all about creating functions and returning in getting inputs and spitting out outputs. All right. Yeah, I guess that is it, people. If you have any doubts, you can ask. I'll be very happy to just solve your doubts. That is it for today. The tomorrow's lecture would be just allowing you to get the elements value from HTML, adding elements and removing elements, taking the elements from the HTML document itself. We'll be learning what is a document first of all. So tomorrow's lecture is going to be pretty heavy. Yeah. The next 3 days are going to be focused towards building our final project. The final project is going to be just a small to-do list, but you will learn a lot of things from it. You will learn how to create an element. You'll learn how to edit an element. You will learn how to listen for any event in the sense whenever you're clicking something or whenever you're typing something, how can we record that event? You will learn that. So the next 3 days are going to be awesome. These were all the fundamentals towards that project, actually. Regarding connection to tomorrow's lecture, I've just said it, Sangeeta. Was this lecture understandable enough? Or if you weren't understanding me, please do say. I'll repeat it once again. You need not have to be silent. Had tried connecting day 7 lecture via playlist link. Was it not working? I think that is because since it's live, we have to end the stream to make it pre-recording available. I think that is the reason. Since the stream is going on, it will not be available in the playlist yet. Once it's available, only then I think it will be available in the playlist. Okay, I guess we have a happy ending then. Thank you, Murugesh, for that. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Tune in tomorrow at 12. I hope YouTube will not, make us in a mess. Let's pray for the best. I'm not sure why this happened for today. The previous 6 days were going fine. No matter I tried to schedule it, it wasn't allowing me to schedule the live thing. That is why we were having an issue. But thankfully, we were able to complete today's session. Can we have a default parameter as the first parameter in the function? Yes, if you had only one parameter, Adrish. If you had multi-parameters, you will not be able to focus it on the first parameter because it's pretty much intuitive, right? Say if we have 4 parameters, if you are passing the first parameter as the default parameter and not passing for all the 3 parameters, then how will you attach the value for the first parameter? I told you before, JavaScript is like this. Whatever value you are attaching, it will be attached to the parameter. All right. So if you're failing to give for all the 3 parameters, automatically it will consider the value for the first parameter. So your purpose will be wasted. That is why JavaScript is saying you that have your default parameters at the ending. So if you are failing to give any value for these three will get the default values. That is why. But for your question, if your function has only one parameter, then default parameter can be done. I'll even show you here itself to just solve your doubt. So here we were having the name value, right? Let me just keep it as somebody as a default value. If the value of name is not given, and if I just call it as greet, it says as somebody. Did you get it, Adrish? But if I give a value of, say, Charan, you can see I'm getting the value of Charan. So this is all about default values. What is Adrish? Yeah, I think that is it. I'm just watching myself say, because we have a 20-second lag, right? Yeah, I think that is it for today. If you had any more doubts, please post it in the chat. I'll be available in the chat for about 5 to 10 minutes. All right. Thank you so much for joining. Let's all tune in tomorrow. Bye-bye.